And the final speaker will be Dr. Sarajuddin Isar, and I can hardly call him doctor because yesterday he was made one. Congratulations to Dr. Isar, who I also had the privilege of examining the thesis that he wrote, which was fascinating.
You gave me a tough time there.
and explored those key issues in Afghanistan that many people have shied away from: taxation, banking, and financial management. So that was a very important and influential piece of work. And I'm also glad to say that his career is continuing in academia, as he's recently taken up a postdoctoral fellowship at the Centre for International Conflict Analysis and Management at Radboud University in the Netherlands. So it's a very impressive trajectory from Dr. Isar. What I'm going to do now is shut up and turn the conversation immediately over to Nemat, who's going to talk about his research. Just to remind panelists, you've got 50 minutes each.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with all of you. And a big thanks and congratulations to Dr. Samuraja and AISS for making this event possible and getting together. The initial idea was to get together the brains of Afghans, so we discuss about our future and what to do in order to make something for our people in our country. Dr. Magnus, thank you. If you allow me, before I talk about my topic, I just briefly talk about our journey as a shifting scholar and also my master's degree, and then jump into the topic of my PhD. Receiving a scholarship is not an easy task. Each and every one scholars, when they receive, they have different impression and different reaction. But for me, as a shifting scholar, it was far more beyond a reaction. It was a dream coming true because it was not the very first year that I applied for shifting scholarship and I got it. I applied for 6 consecutive years, starting from 2015, and every year I was receiving a rejection email. And no matter what, the second day I was starting my preparation for the second year preparation and application. Because I had fully believed in my dreams. And one day I'll make it. Because I believe into it that education is the only way that I can serve my people, myself, and my country. That's what, today the Afghan girls are into it. They're fighting for their rights. And I was doing the same thing. So finally, when it happened in 2021, it was as such that a dramatic things happened, collapse happened. We couldn't make it to UK. We raised up our voices. We reached each and every door. We never left a single student untouched. And finally, we made it, but the collapse was there. And crossing 20 to 25,000 people with a family was not an easy journey. We crossed that. We reached the UK on 24th of August, which on 26th of August, a blast happened. From the same way that I crossed with my family, my child, who was just 18 months, just after a few hours, blast happened, and that road, that area was full of blood. You can imagine how dramatic the situation is for Afghan scholars. 163 country scholars came on that year. They said proper goodbye, hug each other, proper farewells, but for us, it was just only backpack. But with that, we started our journey of a shifting scholar. We advocacy for our rights, we advocacy for Afghan girls, and we're still doing that because we believe in our future and we believe that we will make better for our country. Choosing governance, development, public policy as a field of my MA wasn't a simple thing. It was a decision of just 6 or 7 years, looking into the gap between the people and the government, looking at a huge gap between the natural resource and other resource distributions about in a country. The development was far more behind. So that was why I was choosing every year development, governance, development, public policy. But when I started my studying, for us, the thing I choose that, okay, I'm going to learn this one and come back at country and do this thing properly, nicely. That was no more there. It was like, oh, that was the cause we fell behind. That was the cause we couldn't make it. We should have done like that. The option of governance, participation, election, transparency, corruption, horizontal, vertical, how important those topics were. But for us, it was not there anymore. One of the shielding scholarship essays, which Atefa another knows that, is what you will do when you come back in a country. So that part was no more for us. But with all that, we had a hope, it's okay, it will happen, we will make it. I choose my PhD topic and started a PhD. And the PhD topic is about something which everyone is nowadays doing from last 2 years. What went wrong in Afghanistan? What should have been done better in 20 years? And for me, when I was doing my MA, the things which really attracted me was, okay, we have a stamp, it's called $145 billion went to Afghanistan in the last 20 years, foreign aid. Then what? At the end of the day, it's 97% poverty rate. It's a collapse of the state, collapse of the nation, and a lot of the things which should have been done on foreign aid. So that was the thing which attracted my attention. I said, let's do that way, how important it is. When I started my PhD on that, because the topic is quite broad, I cannot cover all area. I just specified onto NSP in the role of NGO workers. Because you will not find a biggest project like NSP in Afghanistan, which is $1.7 billion spent in 20 years, 80,000 project, the option of Shura, Council, the option of Usher, volunteerism is there. So they're more walking into the grassroots level. So I choose to work with NGO workers because my intention is to look up to the perception of NGO workers. What's important, nobody had ever asked the local communities, what do you want? And that's a big gap, you know. The whole literature about foreign aid in Afghanistan talks about, well, the policies should have been winning heart and mind, but it went the other way around. Nowadays, the policies are, it's a blame game. It was the donor agency which couldn't play its part, and then the government was corrupted. And then the government said, well, because you couldn't give me the whole money, 85% of the money was through off-budget, which Dr. Saab knows that, how that works in off-budget perspective. And then a lot of the other things, rather than playing the heart, winning the heart and mind, we come up with a blame game option. And more importantly, like, of course, the facilitating partners are there, but internationally as well. But I'm going to look the national NGO workers, 7 NGO workers, and interview the workers to find out that what their perception was about the foreign aid. When they were going to the community, what the people were telling, we really like this project or we do not want that project. And then he or she were in a position to convey back that ground reality message, which Dr. Lisa rightly said about the ground reality and networking, is how he or she conveyed that ground reality message back to the ministry, NSP, or the donor agency, that, oh, no, the people are complaining, they don't want this one. It hasn't happened. You know, we had Geneva conference, London conference, Tokyo conference, Kabul conference. You will not find a single national survey in these conferences, which are pledging conferences. They say what the people are thinking about the foreign aid, and it should have been happening. You're pledging, you're giving money, it hasn't happened. Not only that, you look at the whole expenditure of Afghanistan government, 85% expenditure GDP was on foreign aid. In 2009, it was 100%. Another question, as a student comes up, and as an Afghan comes up in my mind, there wasn't a single benchmark for Afghan government, for international communities. Well, see, if you're fully dependent on foreign aid, 100% or 95%. Next year, if you do not lower down that one to 85% or 80%, I'm not going to give you money. Because foreign aid, it will turn out the country and the government into a rentier state, which we have seen in 20 years, it was a rentier state. Because, you know, it's easy money coming to me. I'm not going to work on a revenue generation system because money is coming. We have been never, the Afghan government had never given a deadline or benchmark that next year you have to lower down dependency from 65 or 70% to 5% lower down. If you do not, we're not going to give you fund. Next year, it was going up and nobody had said anything. Not only that, the biggest portion, the aspect of the foreign aid is eradicating poverty. We had seen poverty increase in Afghanistan, 97% now is not as of sudden or 1 year collapse or 2 years collapse, no. From 2007, it was 37%, and it all the way 2012, it went to 45, 2016, it went to 54, and 2020, it was 72%. So nobody had ever asked that, hold on, when the ad is there to eradicate poverty, then why it's not eradicating the poverty? So my PhD is truly looking into the perception of NSP NGO workers, how they were dealing with the ground reality with the people, how they're getting the messages, and what was the flow of the coordination and channel with the NSP, MRD, and donor agency, and then back to with the communities. Hopefully, I'll be doing that through different interviews with NGO workers, and as well as in order to attest their interviews and their statements, whatever they will be saying, I'll have several interviews with the NSP and MRD senior officials and some other researchers to see if that was the ground reality. Thank you, Dr. Seth. Thank you.
This forum, it's a great pleasure for me. I prepared a presentation about my PhD topic. I'm a new starter comparing to Nemat, and also I congratulate Dr. Saraj for completing his PhD. My PhD research is about the role of technology-enhanced innovation in the development of higher education and national development in Afghanistan. I will be presenting it. If you have any questions at the end, I will answer. Thank you. CL, and the other one is use of e-learning platforms. E-learning is interchangeably used with technology-enhanced innovation and also computer-based learning, distance learning, and also web-based learning. But I choose this terminology of technology-enhanced learning because it is e-learning is a broader area, but technology-enhanced focus on the pedagogy and also the use of technology, specifically in the academic area. So when we start to have an overview of higher education in Afghanistan, we see lots of improvements in the last 2 decades, including in education system, in establishment of private higher education, and also the number of public higher education institutions. For example, we had around 7 public universities in 2021. Now we have 83, and so far we see all the statistics here. But besides this improvement, we also had lots of challenges in higher education sector in Afghanistan, including or are not able to go abroad for their studies, and suspension of women education. So if we see on the government's commitments and the actions that have been taking place in Afghanistan, we see that there are lots of policies, strategies, and other documentations that all highlight the use of technology in higher education in order to improve national development in Afghanistan. So for the first time, we had IT center at the Kabul University and other improvements that are listed here. Also, besides the government's commitments, there are different organizations internationally supporting higher education in Afghanistan and focusing on the e-learning. For example, there was a master's program, type of blended learning, a mix of online and also in-person learning in Afghanistan in 2008, and also online exchange program among Afghan university students and also American university students. Other different initiatives. One of the biggest initiatives in this regard is Quality Alliance, which it was funded by USAID, and it covered all Kabul-based universities, and it was also similar to blended learning in Afghanistan. So e-governance academy, or the masters of e-governance for the first time was established in Kabul University in 2015. But in 2 periods of time, we can see the importance of e-learning in Afghanistan. When I say e-learning, I mean the technology-enhanced innovation, but because it's easier for me to say this, we can use them interchangeably. So during the COVID period, and also, as I mentioned before, after the took over power by the Taliban, the role of, or the use of, or applicability of e-learning became very important in higher education in Afghanistan. For the first time, we had higher education learning management system in Afghanistan in 2020, but it was not implemented completely in Afghanistan. However, it was mandatory, something mandatory. So after the ban of girls from higher education, we see that some of organizations use different platforms to provide e-learning, but it is not very sustainable due to different types of problems, including lack of internet access and in general, we can say infrastructure in Afghanistan. So in literature review, I want to very shortly go from this part because they're very detailed. But when I saw totally in general, all the literature about e-learning in Afghanistan focuses on 4 areas. It's adoption and implementation of e-learning, effectiveness of e-learning, perception of teachers and students towards using e-learning in Afghanistan, and also there is attached on them e-learning and also gender equality, which is a part of development or national development, but it is not something that I want. So the problem is that after during 4 decades of war, everything was affected in Afghanistan, including the higher education system, and the quality of higher education was or still is very low. So also we experienced that increased enrollment at higher education's private sector and also in public sector. So they need more resources, they need more qualified instructors and also quality-based education. But one of the most important things in this area is that women are banned of higher education in Afghanistan currently. So we need to find an alternative way and see is really online learning or e-learning applicable in Afghanistan at this such a situation. And also we need to have recommendations for stakeholders who are involved in this area. So in general gaps, I found it out that there are 2 gaps in education sector in Afghanistan, I mean in literature, and based on these gaps, I've chosen my research topic. The first one is that role of e-learning in national development of Afghanistan. We know that the e-learning or quality education works as a catalyst for national development in every country. And also UN task and other strategies emphasize on this, that government should have e-learning or quality education as a part of their national strategy plans. So in Afghanistan also, it was in lots of national development strategic plans as well. And the second gap is that if we see in a broad picture, we need to understand the role of different innovation actors and the interaction between these actors. There are different actors involved in implementation and introduction of e-learning in different aspects. One is government, universities, and also infrastructure. We need to understand and find the interaction between these actors, that how they could act better to have a better e-learning system in Afghanistan. Universities, here is that different elements can affect the implementation of e-learning at the university level. It can be teaching and learning, their management system, mission, and also the strategic plan that universities have, and also the coordination among different universities. I mean, industry or higher education sector. Infrastructure, we know we have lack of infrastructure in Afghanistan, and it is due to different problems. Government can help higher education in innovation in different ways. One is through investment, through the policies, through interaction with donors, and also developmental agencies, and also during or giving the institutional authority to government. So the main research question is, what is the role of technology enhanced learning in development or enhancement of higher education and also national development in Afghanistan? Other questions are, how have higher education institutions adapted and adopted e-learning at their institutions? And one of the main topics under this sub-question is that could the COVID period or implementation of e-learning, establish a system to implement it now and in future. We lack literature in this area. The second question is, what is the dynamic interaction among actors that I explained this before? And the last one is, what is the role of technology innovation in the national development in Afghanistan in specific? So methodologies, a mixed methodology, secondary and primary data will be collected. I don't go in details. I use 4 theoretical frameworks in this area. And also, the last PowerPoint is about the significance of this research. Why do I think it is important to be researched? The first one is it will add to the research body of literature in this area. Second one is that we need to extend higher education to marginalized groups, specifically particularly women, which are deprived of their education right in Afghanistan, and it is very relevant and on time as the situation and the political transformation that we are facing in Afghanistan. And also it is a disciplinary in nature because it is a mix of different areas that I have worked and also I have studies, a complex of education, technology, political science, and also development. That I did my master's in development studies and I worked in education area. And also it can have suggestions and recommendations for policymakers and different or institutions who will apply, who need to apply this. And it is a comparative analysis because I plan to research, or this research focuses on 3 periods of time. One is during the Republic regime of Afghanistan. Second one is the de facto authorities now. And for future, hopefully, we see a political change in Afghanistan. And these recommendations are, I'm positioning the recommendations for a new political settlement in Afghanistan, not the current government. And hopefully, until I finish this research, by the end of 3 years, we face a change in the government. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Of the very core argument of my PhD, so it's not the whole of my PhD, it's one of the core chapters where I'll be discussing the role between taxes and power and how it has kind of shaped up the process of state building in Afghanistan. So I will begin by my research questions, and then I'll go into my analytical framework, and then finally I'll share my core research findings. So the 3 key questions that I ask in this research as well as along the PhD is about how have state taxation policies and practices have evolved historically, but particularly within the past 2 years during the Karzai and Ghani's administration. So those of you who are aware with the literature know about this, it's called the how question. And my second question is, what explain these shifts, changes in the taxation policies? Well, I also call it taxation practices, so because there is a bit of distinction between policy and practice. So that is my why question, and then obviously the theoretical and the policy implication, which is very much to do to so what question. So on the analytical framework, I'm not going to be talking about my historical literature here because of the time that I have been allocated, and I think I had the advantage of presenting my historical finding in many other presentations and conferences, and I know some of the faces who have already heard, so that could have been boring for them, so that's why I avoided. So I begin with the classic endogenous model of state building. Those of you who know Charles Tilly, it is about very famous literature about how the European state building, which he calls a state formation, kind of been shaped up. And there he argues about the 3 core themes, this capital, cohesion, and legitimacy. By capital, he refers to the extractive capacity of the state, which means basically the capacity of the state in the Western Europe and how to tax. And where we stand here is because of that kind of taxation that the Western state developed over the years. And then obviously the second is the the cohesion, which I call the coercive capacity, which is very much to do building up your armies, your defense sector. So that is the two key elements, and then obviously the legitimacy. So the second thing in Afghanistan, so now I look into this from a fiscal perspective. So those of you who know about liberalism, it's all about democracy, building institutions, rule of law, all of these Western values that we see. My argument is that that literature does not work to explain the complexity of power relation, power structure, and power balances in the kind of context like in Afghanistan, which is a conflict kind of setting. So why I argue this? A, it is a very universalized template. It does not work in every complicated mosaic type of society like Afghanistan. And then it is very much the donor's perspective. And interestingly, I have worked with those donors, with IMF. I worked with 7-8 years with the Central Bank of Afghanistan. I know what those chaps are doing there. So it didn't work, and I knew it didn't work. It wouldn't work. So it is very much the IMF prescription. And then, more importantly, it does not take into account the very core realities that we see in the ground. So the very complicated nature of power relation in Afghanistan that I will be talking in a bit. So what I propose basically that the kind of complex nature of a context that we have. So I borrow the political economy model, and there I borrow very much of those of you who know Mushtaq Khan from SOAS. He's an economist just like myself from that kind of background. No offense for those of you who have come from a political perspective, but his core argument is that he talks about political settlement, and political settlement is not a peace agreement. This is a very big confusion that people make. Political settlement, according to Mushtaq Khan, is about how power is organized and how power is distributed. Along with the power, the benefit of also resources also come into play. But more important, the third element of that is the kind of the organizational arrangement that kind of sustain that mechanism. If that mechanism is not sustained through a kind of institutional arrangement, then that is not political settlement, or that is a fragile or a failing political settlement. So rent sharing is the very core of the political settlement. So what I mean by rent, those of you who know or who have come from the economic background know that rent is very much unearned revenue that have come either from, in the context of Afghanistan, it refers to the aid money, and in many Middle East countries is very much to do with the oil, so the natural resources, so that kind of thing. So, but in the political settlement literature, so it goes beyond that. So if you distribute power, position, appointment, that is also considered to be rent. So political settlements are dynamic, fluid, and subject to change. It is not static. It is subject to change. And those of you who have been following things in Afghanistan, particularly during the Karzai, you know how fluid it was. Things were changing and changing and changing, okay? And then the second theory that I borrow is limited access order theory of Douglas North. So he very much, core argument of his theory is about the rent. So rent is created basically by limiting access to valuable resources and functions so that only certain elites can have access to that. And that was exactly what President Karzai was doing. And that was exactly the opposite when President Ghani was doing. So elites' access to resources and power will help sustain order. I know some of you wouldn't like it, but the kind of policy that Karzai sustained, you call it war or whatever, that worked. And that was the reason that order was sustained. So going back to when I come to the hot topics, I drink a little bit of water. So my research findings. My core research finding is that the interaction between three key intertwined factors, namely the changing nature of political settlement, the changing taxation policies and practices, and finally, the role of aid has kind of very much shaped up the relationship between taxation and state building in Afghanistan, both historically and in the past 20 years. When I say past 20 years, I'm not including the Taliban era. So coming to the very practical findings. So So my research finding is in the early days of Karzai, particularly in the very early days, 2001 or perhaps to 2009, although I call it 2001 and 2009, but my reference is very much 2000 and 2005, there was a strategy of institutionalization. So there was a lot of what I call them the golden, at least I can say this for my part, in the Central Bank of Afghanistan, where we worked and we were optimistic about building institutions, building the central bank institution, the banking industry, the Ministry of Finance, the public administration. You all know the parliament, all of those things. So those efforts were all done, and thanks to the West and, of course, to the government of Afghanistan at a time. And there were a lot of reforms made on the legislation. If we make it more specific to taxation, so on the income tax law was revised in 2004 and in 2009, and the VAT law, and then on the organizational level, so we had the large taxpayer office, operational, functional, the medium taxpayer office, and the small taxpayer office. They did not exist before, just to be aware of. And then at the automation, you talk about the technological role in the education, and the technology is really important, and I agree with your point that now we live in the age of information. A couple of clicks can change not the world, but things around the people. So at that front, so the two key tools that was introduced by the help of the World Bank and others, we call them the sectors and the ASICODA. Those are two technical, so I don't want to go through them, but they were basically to kind of manage the income coming from the personal income and the income coming from the custom duties. And then, so there were a lot of efforts with respect to institutionalization, building institution, and centralization of revenue, more importantly. And as you can see, figures speak. You can see that the GDP and revenue GDP ratio has kind of been increasing. And if you see, it was 3.2%, reaching to 8.4%. And that was like very promising. And I kind of, the figures, Nemat John was, we can talk about that because there was, we were doing right at some point. So aid money, I'll come to that in a bit. And then, but after 2009, things have changed. Many people argue that Karzai's first term and second term kind of seem the same, but that's not true. As you may know, that the second term, when Karzai became the president again, the strategy, in fact, the strategy of institutionalization has evolved or shifted to deinstitutionalization strategy even in 2009, but more firmly, it changed after 2009. And that one of the reasons was because, A, the relationship between Karzai, most of you know, was not good with the US and the Western partners. So they did not like him. He did not like them. So, and there was a growing tension. And that's why Karzai's reliance kind of shifted more and more on the informal processes, informal networks, and informal structures. So that kind of, the bit of optimism that we had grown up was fading. So what happened then, a very patrimonial type of state kind of emerged, a state that was based on rent seeking, on rent distribution, rent negotiation. So that's very much of a co-option policy. So what the co-option policy did, it sustained order. According to Douglas North, what is more important, he doesn't care about anything. We need order, just order, security, that's it, stability. Forget about how good the institutions are, how much the corruption is there, it's a different story. So that limited access order was sustained. But there was a cost after 2009. The cost was to the taxation. So Karzai was so reluctant about the taxation and he didn't care. And there was a lot of, to do that, sustaining an order, so he relaxed basically taxes. Tax avoidance, tax evasion. Those of you who know, one is legal, one is illegal. Tax evasion is illegal, whereas tax avoidance is legal. So both of them were excessively allowed. I'll try to finish off soon. And then, so the custom duties and the custom duties in particular became a source of rent negotiation between powerful elites and President Karzai. And then MPs, and I have a big section about the elite bargains between members of parliament and the government, and particularly within the Ministry of Finance, how the tax rates or custom rates were being kind of negotiated. Like if if one of the, I call the client of the MPs were not hired or appointed within a custom house in a very remote provincial center or provincial custom houses. So what would happen, and I asked this from several ministers of finance and they had no answer because they would be impeached. Impeachment would mean that they would risk losing. That's why most of my interviews say that even the finance minister didn't care about pushing towards taxing a lot. And that's why that dependency that Nemat John was talking, and that was one of the factors that we still relied more dependent. Of course, when aid money comes in, why would you care about it? It is like a very natural influence or factor that one cannot ignore. So there was all these, I call it Juramat. Magnus likes my term. So it is the very special agreement between the taxpayers and the tax officials. So that means that there was a classification or reclassification of tax rates, both for income and particularly within the custom houses, because that was easier because nobody could access them. So if a tax official comes to, say, a wedding hall, so tax assessment will not be like here in the UK. It is very much compliant and it is very much automatic. It was not like that. Say they will go, they will negotiate and say, okay, 2%, okay, 2%, no, 1%, no, 10%, 11%. So that kind of culture exists. And you see, what would you expect? So what happens then? You can see the figures. So you see that the GDP revenue ratio is kind of decreasing. So from 10.8%, it came down to 8.2%. And then, so the kind of, so now on Ghani, now how much time do I have? 4 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay. So when talking about Ghani, so Ghani was totally an opposing feature of Karzai. He was totally on the other side of the game. So what he did, he kind of disrupted the kind of political settlement that was forward there. So he tried very much. In fact, his own Minister of Finance target, Ghani was a Minister of Finance. He was never a president. He was always focusing about taxation. That's why I call this, there was a strategy of self-reliance. And that kind of credit can go to Ghani, but to what cost? So what he did basically, he introduced so many new tax measures. So if you can see here, some of you who have come recently from Afghanistan, you know how much you love the mobile taxes that you pay to President Ghani anyway, when you're not sure where that money is going. So he did all these taxes. I don't want to go into these figures given the amount of time I have. So same on the custom duties, he was just pushing. And all of his tax officials was complaining. He says he's just asking, get the money. We're not taking into the fact about the factors or the situation of the economy and these sort of things. So his strategy of self-reliance kind of contributed to tax and revenue. I call it revenue because custom duty is not a tax. So kind of increased. And I think the 13.4% of GDP contributed by revenue is unprecedented in Afghanistan history. This credit does go to of course, to Ghani. But Afghanistan, based on the literature, was still fragile because based on DFID's definition, if your revenue GDP ratio is below 15%, you're a fragile country. So we will still remain as a fragile state because we never managed to. And I think it was only very short-lived. But after 2020, things have changed. Okay, despite the differences in policies between and practices between Karzai and Ghani, there were continuities. There were similarities that was being practiced by both presidents. So both Karzai and Ghani failed massively, let's put it this way, to establish a very functioning, robust type of taxation system or a public administration. The tax basis, as much as Ghani tried his best, still remained very narrow. And the revenue, if you look at the figures, throughout the history in the past, particularly in the past 20 years, never increased beyond nearly 3 billion. So it was reaching to 3 billion, but it never moved beyond 3 billion in the whole of the 20 years. With all is a self-reliance policy and whatsoever you call it. So both Karzai and both Ghani could not prevent rent seeking and these sort of things. And then tax evasion and leakages was there, that the culture of Juramat still prevailed there along the custom houses, and exploitation of system was unavoidable. Okay, and just this is something very interesting to Nemat John. So there was an off budget, and there's an international dimension, the role of aid money coming. So I'm done. So the aid money was also, it's not just to blame the government, but also the international partners did not do their job. So the money was coming not through the government, whatever government you call it. So they say the capacity is not there, but the money was coming off the budget, and there was being funding the very powerful elites informally, and that kind of mechanism did not help, and that led to a kind of dual public sector, I call it, a dual public sector, one managed by the international community, the donors, and the other managed by the government. And that kind of dualism in the system created a lot of chaos, a lot of headache. Some of my interviewees said that all of their job within the Ministry of Finance was to please the donors, and they were working so many reports and reporting. So, and donors were, and this affected the accountability, because the donors were very much accountable to their own jurisdiction, to their own countries, not to the government of the people, government of Afghanistan, nor to the people of Afghanistan. So what would you expect from accountability if that kind of mechanism is there? And then the PRTs were there. I don't want to talk about the PRTs and what it did. And at the same time, an illegal, informal taxation system was created by the Taliban, and that kind of paved the collapse of the government. I don't want to talk about the factors that contributed to the collapse, because there are many of them, but I would just say the Ghani's over-centralization policies kind of weakened the kind of political settlement that was forged before. So those power brokers who could have fought against Taliban, they were all weakened, and Ghani, all his focus was to weakening those power brokers because of the rent distribution mechanism that was there. So even, as you can see, after Ghani came, the violence escalated, and then the violence was spreading, and that kind of, and then of course the international factor, the Doha talk, the peace talks, sidelining Ghani and then giving more space to the Taliban, will eventually lead to the collapse of the republic. And thank you very much. Sorry if I've taken more time. One of the other chapters of my PhD is talking about the wider implication. Again, it is not the global. I'm not looking into the international relations, the relation between the US, the relation between Pakistan, or those sort of things, because that's not within my literature or within my discipline. So, but I talk about the role of the wider implication of the international aid, the role of external actors, and that's why I was referring to the Peer Provincial Reconstruction Team, PRTs, and how they kind of shaped up those local dynamics, and of course the kind of taxation, the off-budget mechanism. So in January my PhD will be available, so I hope you will have the chance to read it, and I'm sure most of your questions will be answered there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. I know about your charity organization, that you are doing a very important research around girls' education. Regarding the valid certification of girls' education, of the take classes, as we have a university and also a school now is still operating in Afghanistan, we have thought a lot about this. My research is about higher education, which is something different from education and schooling or underground schools. But on that regard, I think there is a possibility of, which can be both in higher education and also education, that keep the records of the students. If you have, for example, collaboration with one of the schools, that something that we plan to do is to keep the records, and hopefully one day allow it, we can give those records to students through the Ministry of Education, some type of this. And the other way and solution can be collaboration among other schools and universities outside Afghanistan. They can give the certification, but still it needs to be approved by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan, which is a problem. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a solid way, but I think that can be a solution. Mr. John, thank you for your comments and observation. This is not a historical research, but for looking forward, we need to have a look on the past, what has been or what had happened, and how can we learn from those lessons in this regard. Something that I forgot to mention, although it was in the presentation slides, that I don't want to touch on all pillars of development. The thing that I want with this research aims is to focus on the human development and quality research by the means of national development. So if you want to know this, we need to go to figures in the previous development. But for the Taliban period, or the de facto authority in the worst case scenario, if there will not be any change, we can at least find out something to about the application of e-learning, because still we have some questions that Dr. Saib also said, that there are different organizations delivering education and higher education, but still there are some questions. By this, I was interested to touch on this as well, and if in worst case scenario there will not be any change, we can have a solution for this period, or at least we can learn from what happened in this period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very big question to answer that who hand over the government to Taliban, so I can't respond to that. But first, it's not a thesis yet, it's a project. I'm working on it, and I'm going to find out the role of NGO workers, how they're playing coordination and finding the ground reality and sending it back to authorities what to be changed for next year. And the fact, we cannot deny that. Of course, we have seen in 20 years the corruption perception index about Afghanistan was showing quite drastic situation, how the country was fully into corruption. And of course, we cannot deny the ghost police, the ghost schools, all those people were involved into it. And a part of my project will be also covering the elite role into project awarding, into playing those dynamics, what to be transferred, what not to be transferred, or who backing which NGOs or which sectors. So yeah, of course, while I'll be doing my research with the NGO workers, that part is quite important, that how NGO project awarding was shaping. So I'll be looking into that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think first of all, I just made a correction because earlier the term I had forgotten is, excuse my English, is granular analysis. So granular from the word grain, I believe, comes. So granular analysis, that to your question basically is a very detailed analysis. I think the answer is something which is not that. It's a disclaimer. And on the question of the Taliban, Muntasib and Zainab John, I did not cover Taliban because of the fact that I was due to submit a PhD, but I have not kind of I have been very tied up with the literature on the Taliban. So the kind of taxation that the Taliban is pursuing, in fact, I have a section about the illegal, informal taxation that Taliban have been practicing in areas where they were in control. So that's talk a lot about that. But now, turning a de facto authority into a kind of government, there is a very new literature emerging. Those of you who are interested in global governance, there is a very good project in Netherlands going on, and papers will come out of that, which talks about rebel to state transition. So which is very interesting, and it does talk about the taxation dynamics. So just on the very specific question you asked, there is not just two types of taxation that are following. Because basically there are 5 religious taxations. So you name 2 of them: the zakat, the ushur, 1/10. There is another one, khums, 1/5, then kharaj, and the 5th one, which is not top of my head. So the kind of taxation that Taliban have been imposing is, I call it coercion. There is a very good paper by Mahmoud from here, who used to be teaching here, the head of ICTD, who is no longer there now, between coercion and contract. His core argument about taxation is that there is a very tiny difference between taxation as a contract and taxation as a coercion. So if you are not reciprocating the kind of services that the people deserve, then you are just stealing from the pockets of the people, and that's called coercion. You're coercing the people, you're pushing them, like the term you used, you're punishing them, you're penalizing them. And that was exactly what the Taliban have been doing. They just know tax the people, because Islam has stated that, but they do not look into the reciprocation or the reciprocity that involves in the process of taxation. So when you take money from the pockets of the people, you've got to deliver back. And that's what we see here. Taxation without representation is a very big literature in the context of the United States of America. So even I call them not coercive taxation, I call them extortion, because what the Taliban have been doing, just extortion. And I also don't disagree. Maybe we can talk during the tea break. There is a lot going on about the Taliban and the kind of taxation that they have been imposing, and the figure that they present, the transparency in all of this, I don't buy off any of this argument. And the second question, also I hope it answers your questions, I'm not going to, but we can talk about it. About the Juramat, I think the Juramat, which is the very much the Juramat can mean anything in any context, but Juramat in the kind of taxation means it is an agreement, a special type of arrangement between taxpayers and tax officials. In the West or in here in the UK, you will never see who these guys are from the HMRC. They will just send you a letter and that will shock you. So that's why they say there has to be legal protection for tax officials. So, but in Afghanistan or in most of the developing countries, which is very subject to corruption, so tax officials are very powerful. They will just go, and the kind of agreement that I was referring, so they would either in the custom houses or for the personal or corporate income tax. If you are importing, for custom duty it's much easier. That's why those posts were sold very expensively between MPs and ministries of finance, or ministers of finance, or whoever are in power. So they would agree, like if they have 5 trucks, if you're a trader, you have 5 trucks full of goods and stuff, whatever. So if you've got, say, luxurious goods like mobile phones or cars or whatsoever, you want your goods to be imported. And that's why you need to get them imported, and no matter how much it costs you will just give a few pennies, or maybe a few thousands. It depends on the kind of agreement and who you will face in which area. And that was exactly the kind of Juramat that was practiced between the Taliban and the traders, the Taliban, the power brokers, the police chief, custom heads, and of course tax officials from the Republican government of Afghanistan.